You're anxious to hear him and not me, so I'll keep this very brief. Reminders, shut off your phones. Okay, we don't want to make sure that both broadcasts are seamless. Going to start by saying, remember when Andrew Breitbart held up the phone? Remember Andrew at the rallies and he said, you are the media? That you have access to information and news and it's up to you to report it accurately because the mainstream media is so biased and so corrupt. Remember that? Well, it's taken on a life of its own, and our guest tonight, Jason Goodman, is an independent journalist who operates Crowdsource the Truth. And he's been exploring this option full-time and the incredible scandal that Washington and the mainstream media have been as quiet as they can be. You haven't heard much on NBC, CBS, NBC, if you ever watched them, right, or in the background about Imran Awan, the Pakistani, given responsibility for the Democrat Party's computers and networks. And he worked for Debbie Wasserman-Schultz, and he had access to the confidential Blackberrys of at least 50 congressmen, and maybe many, many more. Okay, so he had access to all of their emails, all of their PDF files, all of their conversations, and many of these Congress people sat on Homeland Security, Threats Committee, okay? Serious stuff, but again, the media's been as quiet, mainstream media's been as quiet as a mouse. So Crowdsource the Truth has stepped forward under Jason's guidance, and he's reported that Awan was arrested for bank fraud at the airport by the FBI as he was about to leave the country. But he's also may have sold U.S. secrets to a lot of different people who we don't even know because the government refuses to really investigate thoroughly. So he's publishing stories and doing interviews that the mainstream media will not, and he's filling the void and taking a real leadership role. So please welcome me in joining Jason Goodman.
Thank you so much, everyone. I want to thank everybody for coming here tonight to hear me speak. It's great to see everyone. Can you hear me out there, everybody? Thank you very much. Hey, we have some veterans here tonight. Is that correct? Can people raise their hands if we have some veterans in the audience? I met a few people earlier. Thank you so much for your service. It's great to be here at the American Legion. I think everyone should thank you guys tremendously. And of course, this is going to be able to be viewed online after we're done here tonight, so I hope everyone will check that out on the cable channel or on Crowdsource the Truth. And as Laura said, you know, I want to talk to you about a spy ring that exists in Congress. And the mainstream media has been talking about Imran Awan. He's been arrested for bank fraud. Now, this is just the tip of the iceberg as far as the crimes that this individual seems to have perpetrated. The bank fraud, of course, facilitated the purchase of 12 homes in the Virginia area. Now, this was a guy who was employed full-time in Congress, working in the IT department, the Information Technology Department of Congress, where he allegedly hacked the cell phones and the laptops and the computer systems of over 80 congressional members. And it seems quite possible that Debbie Wasserman-Schultz and many other members of Congress were fully aware and maybe even complicit in these acts. Now, how many people here today have ever heard the name Imran Awan before right now? Okay, most everyone. Not everyone, but most everyone. This is a scandal that has the potential to be even larger than Watergate. Is it shocking to learn that the Pakistani national is hacking the members of Congress, stealing their data, blackmailing them with their own data? We have reason to believe that this individual is a member of the Pakistani ISI. That's the Pakistani equivalent of the CIA. And in fact, it's even possible that the CIA itself has enabled the Pakistani ISI to insert this individual into Congress because it just seems impossible that one guy and his brothers and his wife could infiltrate the U.S. Congress to the degree that this has been done. Now, I went to the hearing in Washington, D.C. just 3 weeks ago for this individual, and the attorney basically said he's under house arrest right now, and his attorney would like his 50-mile radius that he's being monitored by GPS to be increased to 100 miles, apparently because he's driving for Uber. However, when journalists checked with Uber, there's no record of Imran Awan driving with Uber. Now, the attorney in question is a guy by the name of Christopher Gowan. Has anybody ever heard of Christopher Gowan before? Christopher Gowan is a longtime associate of the Clintons. He's been involved in the Clinton Foundation. He's been involved in the Clinton Global Initiative. These are organizations that are currently under federal and international probe for tax evasion and various other wrongdoings. And this individual stood up in court and represented that a foreign national who is wanted for bank fraud and was stopped at O'Hare Airport trying to flee to Pakistan, that this guy needs even greater freedom to move around so he can drive for Uber. It seems that he lied to the court. It seems to me that he presented false information to the court. But yet nothing happens. And this seems to go on and on and on, whether it's Hillary Clinton's email server that, we just hear, oh, well, she used personal email, and that's fine. That was just a mistake, right? How many people think Hillary Clinton just accidentally sent some personal emails from her server? Do you think that was an accident? Okay? There's a big, important difference between using a personal email address, having a personal email domain, which is clintonemail.com, and then maintaining the server for that domain in your home. This is such a gross departure from the standards and practices of the United States State Department. It's hard to categorize. But what the mainstream media tries to do, whether it's Fox or CNN or MSNBC or the Washington Post, is they try to just shrink this down into a tiny little segment or a little snippet so they can sell it to you on television and have it seem like it's no big deal. Give everybody involved immunity, brush it under the carpet, and send everybody on their merry way. Now, what Crowdsource the Truth has been trying to do is to assemble the power of individuals through the internet so that we can all work together to rise above the quote-unquote fake news. And Crowdsource the Truth is a growing community that is bringing in journalists and legal professionals, people with military experience, people with law enforcement experience, and even regular people who just happen to be sitting in front of their computers and can evaluate this information and share what they know. For instance, we've been examining this article in the Washington Post about Imran Awan. How many people read the Washington Post here? Nobody. Good. He's a smart group. Well, the Washington Post published this image of Imran Awan that looks like a fashion photo shoot. It's not a photograph that they just happened to snap as he was leaving the court building, which seems like the way a journalist would get a picture of someone who, even though an independent investigation has been going on for almost 1 year, something like 3 photographs of this guy existed on the internet. Now, I think we all know with Facebook and Twitter and all the various ways that people are sharing images on social media, the fact that only 3 photographs of this individual that exist, that seems like someone is deliberately trying to keep himself off of the internet. Yet the photograph that the Washington Post used showed this beautiful fashion photograph with a soft, blurred background. And now what's happened is people in the crowdsource community, we brought some attention to this photograph because it seemed a little strange to me. Washington Post just shows it to you and says, hey, there's no evidence of espionage. This is a nice guy who's being targeted due to Islamophobia and racism and all these terrible things. But in fact, the Washington Post, it would seem, scheduled a time to photograph this individual. The metadata from the photograph, information embedded within the photograph that tells us the camera that was used, a Fuji XT camera, I think it's an XT2 camera, the 56 millimeter lens that was used, the f1.2 aperture setting that was used, and all this information corresponds, in my mind, with my knowledge as a professional cinematographer, to exactly the way you'd need to set a camera to get this type of fashion photo, soft background, beautiful type of glamour shot image. And it's got a subliminal effect on the mind. It doesn't seem like this rushed suspect who's leaving the courthouse, who's being snatched in a photograph at the last minute. It seems like a calm, poised, well-groomed individual who couldn't possibly be guilty of espionage, But the other thing that we're learning is it seems like this photograph wasn't even taken on the same day as the hearing. Now, I'm going to continue to dig into the photograph, and I hope that when everybody watches this at home on their computers and seeks out this photograph in the Washington Post, you'll think about some of the things that I'm saying. Because there are actually some photographs of Imran Awan leaving the courthouse. And I want you to pay close attention to his haircut. Because when I sat there in the courtroom, it looked like he had just come from the barbershop that morning. Guy wants to look his best in court. But in this photograph that seems to be taken on September 13th, it looks like maybe a week or two has gone by since his last haircut. Still looks neat, but his hair is a little bit longer. And someone else in the crowdsourced community has even identified the lamppost behind him, and I haven't verified this yet, but they think it matches the look of the street outside of Christopher Gowan's office at Gowan, Rhodes, and Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, or whoever else is involved in this law firm that's defending this guy. Incidentally, it's a very expensive law firm. They've worked with the Clintons. Now, this is a guy who is so financially destitute, he apparently needs to drive for Uber. I don't know how he's able to afford such a fancy lawyer. So that's an interesting set of circumstances. The other thing that we've done with Crowdsource the Truth is, we go out and we go and confront some of these lawmakers and ask them what is going on. Recently, not that long ago, Hillary Clinton had a book signing, some people may be aware. She wrote a book trying to, I guess, explain or figure out, I'm not sure which, what happened. She didn't win. What happened? We don't know. Maybe Russia hacked? I don't think so. But Mrs. Clinton certainly lost the election. So I went to Barnes & Noble in New York City and I waited in the line to ask Mrs. Clinton exactly what happened. And when I got up to the front of the line, I asked her what happened that allowed Imran Awan to operate a spy ring within Congress. And the former secretary laughed at me. And she said, well, you never know. I guess we'll never know. Yes, it was quite hysterical, according to Mrs. Clinton. But we're starting to get a pretty good idea of what may have happened, because the other thing we're doing with Crowdsource the Truth is we're engaging in real investigative journalism. We've gone out, now I mentioned that Imran Awan, he's being tried for bank fraud. And what he did was, he and his wife went and got a large number of loans from the Congressional Federal Credit Union. They got something like 12 loans. There's a guy who's earning $160,000 a year. How many people in the audience have 12 loans and own 12 homes? No one? No, I don't see any hands. No one owns 12 homes? That's so strange. I thought most people earning $160,000 a year own 12 homes. Well, Imran Awan and his wife own 12 homes. And in violation of their home equity loans, they weren't living in these homes as their primary residences. They were renting them out. Now, we've only been able to locate 2 of the renters so far, but we're not stopping. We're reaching out to other people that may have rented homes in the Virginia area, outside of Washington, D.C., that may have rented homes from Imran Awan and his wife, Hina Alvi. Now, the 2 people that we've spoken to, one of them was a Marine veteran by the name of Andre Taggart. He and his wife and their 4 children rented a home at 9667 Hawkshead Drive. And we've also spoken with a woman by the name of Laurel Everly, where she and her daughter rented a home at 4809 Sprayer Street. And that was in Alexandria, Virginia. Now, the interesting thing is Mr. Taggart found in the home, when he moved in there, a lot of IT equipment. Now, this might seem normal in the home that you're renting from someone who works for the Congressional IT department, except this equipment had government markings on it. And the U.S. Capitol Police have been investigating Mr. Awan and his brothers and other individuals that they're affiliated with for theft of equipment from Congress, laptops, Blackberry phones, etc. And the investigation has provided evidence that gives us reason to believe that these phones may have been hacked with the intent of downloading the information from the phones. Now, keep in mind, of course, everyone here, I'm sure, is using a smartphone. They've got their email on there, text messages, social media, contacts, all kinds of data. If someone were to hack your phone, well, they might know where you go, who you're emailing, all the messages you have in there, and all of that data seems to be being aggregated in an off-site server. The U.S. Capitol Police have accused Mr. Awan of housing an off-site server. Now, at the 4809 Sprayer Street house, we have identified evidence provided by Ms. Everly that indicates, in addition to a shed that Imran Awan had at the house, there was a padlocked shed that the renter had no access to that had a light on 24/7. And Mr. Awan had the keys to this rental home. He would come and go as he pleased, sometimes 2-3 times a week. He would enter this shed, the renter never had access to the shed. She asked him, what's going on with the light in the shed? You're running up my electric bill. And he said, it's got to stay on because it's a light on a cooling unit for the shed. Now, I don't know how many people here might be operating illicit off-site data centers at their home, but of course you don't want your computers to overheat. So keeping them cool in a shed might be something you would do. Additionally, if you're transferring information to and from the computers over the internet, you would need some sort of internet connection. And what we've discovered by investigating information that we got, a video from Ms. Everly's cell phone, it indicated that in the basement there was a network router provided by the Cox Internet Company. And this was not the internet router that her and her daughter were using. She had an account with Verizon, and they used a Wi-Fi router upstairs. This Cox internet router in the basement was unknown to her before we pointed it out by just spotting it in this video she had on her cell phone. Now, we confirmed with Cox Cable that they were providing internet in the house until it was sold in June of 2017. So, again, this isn't proof of anything, but it certainly is strong evidence to indicate that there may have been an off-site server being operated at 4809 Sprayer Street without the knowledge of the renter. Now, this is damning evidence, but yet the Washington Post, despite interviewing Laurel Everly 2 weeks before I did, they didn't release any of this. They didn't investigate this. The FBI has spoken with her. They didn't discover this Cox router in the house. They didn't ask her about the locked shed. And I found this very curious. Now, of course, we all know James Comey has recently come under fire. Well, I should say he's actually been fired from the FBI. Does anybody know what James Comey did previously in his career, before he was working for the FBI? Well, there's a website called opensecrets.org that tells you quite a bit about James Comey's previous employment. He used to work at Lockheed Martin. You might be surprised to know. Lockheed Martin, of course, is a military contractor, and Mr. Comey earned something in the range of, I believe, $6 million while he was working there. There's an employment timeline for James Comey on opensecrets.org, and I hope you'll all become regular viewers of Crowdsource the Truth. Tune in on Sundays and watch the program Sunday with Charles, where well-known financial analyst and investigator Charles Ortel continues to explore the financial crimes of the Clinton Foundation and various people who are associated with it and other foundations and other organizations that are engaged in financial crime. So it's interesting to note that James Comey's FBI seemed not so interested in investigating these crimes, and that my loose organization of people across the internet who aren't even paid were able to hone in on this evidence in a very small amount of time. And this is the power of the crowdsourced community. Everyone out there has got different capabilities, different knowledge. The two people that came to us, the renters, Andre Taggart and Laurel Everly, they watched the show and came forward because they became aware of our program by watching on the internet. And in the case of Laurel Everly, she was very frustrated that Sean Boberg of the Washington Post and Luke Rosiak of the Daily Caller did not put her story out there. Now, there's another thing that came up from the Daily Caller. How many people are familiar with the Daily Caller? You guys check out that website? Okay, so you know Luke Rosiak, you've seen his writing probably. So the Daily Caller put out a story about the so-called 123 email. And what this was a story which indicated that Imran Awan I believe the article came out August 29th, and the article indicated that Imran Awan, the IT staffer, as he's called, was still operating a secret email address. Now, the issue that I have with this is that we don't really know how Mr. Rosiak determined that this was, as he categorized it, an active email address. It may well have been, but we don't know. As far as I know, he doesn't describe it in the article, but as far as I know, he just sent an email to it, and because that email wasn't returned to him, bouncing back, sometimes you send an email to the wrong address and it says undeliverable email, that's the wrong address. Well, if you send an email to 123@mail.house.gov, it goes through, and there are various email testing programs, because I've been talking about this for a few days. So what happens is people out there in the crowdsource community, they send me emails and Facebook messages and Twitter messages and text messages and Skype phone calls and all kinds of things. And they say, hey, here's an open source tool that you can use to test an email address. And I've tested all these addresses. I've tested 123@mail.house.gov. And it says, hey, okay, this is a working email address. Now, I've also tested Mickey Mouse at mail.house.gov, Donald Duck at mail.house.gov, the King of Siam at mail.house.gov. They all test out okay. In the article that I was discussing just a moment ago, Luke Rosiak also states that Imran Awan, which was Mr. Awan's official email address when he was working for the House of Representatives, they're saying that that is no longer an active account. And I don't know how they arrived at this determination, because when I test that account, it seems to be working. So what seems to be going on, in my estimation, is that whoever's running the IT department at the House of Representatives is smart enough to set up their email server in such a way that nefarious individuals cannot do what's called an alphabet attack or a dictionary attack, where you just set a computer to email any old thing at mail.house.gov, and every time they return, you say, well, that's not a working address, that's not a working address. Aha! Donald Duck seems to be working for the House of Representatives. Donald Duck at mail.house.gov works. And then you could derive what works and what doesn't work. So what seems to be the case is that anything at all at mail.house.gov will go through. Now, Luke Rosiak goes on in this article to connect this email address with people who work for Andre Carson, and there's other evidence. This guy Nathan Bennett is linked to the 123 email address. I've been asking Luke Rosiak for several days. I contacted him on Twitter. I've been putting out these broadcasts. I do believe Luke Rosiak is aware of my broadcasts, because when I met him outside of Imran Awan's hearing, he knew who I was. So I sincerely do want to speak to Luke Rosiak, because I don't think he's doing this out of nefarious intent. I think it's possible he made a mistake. Whenever we get involved in these things that involve technology and email servers, there's a lot of intricacies. There's a lot of ways that mistakes can be easily made. I really just want to get to the bottom of this, and I want to find out who has enabled this spy ring in Congress. There are a lot of indicators right now that seem to show us that there may in fact be a plea deal being arranged for Imran Awan and his wife, Hina Alvi. So there's a lot of people in our audience that object to this idea. They don't like the notion that Imran Awan is going to get off with some sort of reduced sentence and he's going to get to go back to Pakistan and not be punished. I'm just curious, how many people would object to the notion of a spy within Congress not being prosecuted, being let off? You would object to that. What if the plea deal that he made involved revealing the names of members, elected members of Congress who are complicit in this spy ring? What if we could say, you know what, we'll let this guy go back to Pakistan, never allowed to return to the United States, but he's going to tell us what Debbie Wasserman-Schultz knew about it, what Andre Carson might have known about it, did they know about it, who was involved, who gave this guy the access? How many people out here have looked at WikiLeaks at all? Not too many. So WikiLeaks has been categorized in the mainstream media as a foreign intelligence operative, an enemy intelligence service. WikiLeaks, in my estimation, is releasing information that reveals corruption. For instance, they released emails that they got from John Podesta, who was Hillary Clinton's campaign manager. They released emails they got from Hillary Clinton They released emails that they got from the DNC. And some of the things that were revealed in these emails were things like, oh, thank you so much. Mr. Imran Awan had Debbie Wasserman-Schultz's password for her iPad. Now, obviously, this would allow him to access her email. It's on her iPad. This would allow him access to a whole lot of things. Maybe Representative Schultz had no idea what he was doing. I don't know. But I certainly would like to know. And my personal opinion is I'm all right with giving Hina Alvi, who incidentally had already fled to Pakistan. Imran Awan's wife had already left. We've got information that indicates that President Trump was putting pressure on the Pakistani government by withholding something like $200 million in military aid to negotiate the return of Hina Alvi so that she could testify in this very case. Now, there's a lot of concern that in the case of the email server in Chappaqua, Hillary Clinton's clintonemail.com private domain, not state.gov, private server, not a U.S. government server run by the House of Representatives or whoever might run it, a privately controlled, unencrypted, very unsecure server at Mrs. Clinton's house that held all of her emails. In that case, the FBI handed out immunity to, I think, 5 individuals involved, but in exchange for nothing. None of those individuals testified about who enabled that, and that's a serious concern. We don't want to see a situation where Mr. Awan or Ms. Alvi are given immunity in exchange for leaving. That does no one any good. We definitely want them to talk about who hired them, who put them there in Congress, who gave them this access, who paid them $160,000 a year, which was about 2.5 times the average salary of a congressional staffer. How could they own and manage 12 homes while also working full-time in Congress? We haven't even spoken about the over 20 businesses that Mr. Awan seems to have operated, including shipping companies, fruit canning companies, sports equipment companies. None of this seems to make sense. So, again, this investigation has been an open source investigation. It's taking information from everywhere, compiling it together, and that's a very tricky way to operate, but it's also an extremely powerful way to operate, because what happens is the power of the crowd, like, you know, we've got 40 or 50 people here in the room with us, and if you can imagine the number of people that will watch this on the internet, I can assure you it will be thousands. As a matter of fact, right now, we've got 400 people joining us right here on YouTube. We've got several hundred people watching live on Periscope. We've got 46 people watching on Facebook. And, oh, I'm sorry, I need to refresh that. It's more than 46. But the point of the matter is this goes out over the internet, and anyone who knows anything about Imran Awan, the homes that he rented in the Virginia area, that he owned and rented to people in the Virginia area, and all of the activities that he was involved in, can call, they can email me, truth@crowdsourcethetruth.org, with any information that they might have. And I want to share something else with you, because there's been a lot of speculation. That's the danger, is that we get into speculation. Everybody can just sort of come up with any old idea. And I've been in direct communication with Laurel Everly, and there's been a lot of pressure put on her because there are questions about, you know, did she know? She had a lot of contact with Imran Awan, and it seems like one of Imran Awan's methods of operating was to do identity theft. He would get a fake name and start sending mail to the house. And then by establishing this name associated with the house, then he would order things possibly to the house, or, you know, start to get associations of names to these addresses that he owned. Now, we've only got a small sampling right now of 2 renters. So it's difficult to get a very good picture of what exactly he was trying to do. So sometimes we create what's called the working theory. And there are various working theories out there. There's one that I've just come up with today. Now, before I started Crowdsource the Truth, I had a career in Hollywood. I was a cinematographer and a director, and I've invented a variety of 3D camera systems. If anybody's seen Amazing Spider-Man or X-Men Days of Futures Past or Metallica Through the Never, you guys all Look like Metallica fans to me. How many people have seen Metallica Through the Never? Yeah, there we go, in the back. Very good. Thank you. Thank you for the $12. Anyway, those are some of the films that I worked on, but, it occurred to me today that, I had a neighbor across the street when I lived in Hollywood. He had a beautiful house. We used to have barbecues at his house all the time. And he would invite his friends, I would invite my friends, and we would all, get together. And there'd be, a lawyer here and there. His real estate agent would come by sometimes, estheticians, things like this. But really, I would say 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 out of 10 people that would come to these barbecues were involved in the film industry. So if you purchased a house in Hollywood and put it on the market and you advertised it on Craigslist or, put an ad on, Zillow or something like that, let's say 5 people, 10 people answered the ad to want to rent the house. You can do these background checks on people. You can go on Spokeo.com and you can go on these various public domain websites where you can order a background check on someone. You can see who their relatives are. You can see who they're affiliated with, businesses, previous addresses they've been associated with. And I would venture to guess, based on the small sampling of people that would come to these barbecues at my friend's house in Hollywood, that you would find a lot of people with a lot of affiliations in the film industry. Now, if you own 12 homes in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and you put those 12 homes on the market, and let's say only 5 people, let's say only 1 person answered each of those ads. Now you're doing background searches on 12 people, and the people that they know, and their brothers, and their fathers, and their mothers, and their ex-husbands, ex-wives, sisters, whoever, and their affiliations, okay? So let's say you're Imran Awan. You put these houses on the market, and you start doing background checks on people. Some of the houses he advertised on a website called militarybyowner.com. And that is a website that specifically is geared toward renting these houses to people in the military, okay? Now, you're renting the house. You can control the rent. You can make it real low if you want to rent it to someone in particular and say, hey, this guy, maybe someone's wife works for, I don't know, an intelligence agency, and maybe you've got the great idea that you're going to somehow compromise their internet network or spy on them, maybe through a security system in the home, or maybe listen in on the home, or maybe install video cameras in the home so you can see what they're doing, or maybe hack into their computer and put a keystroke logger on there so you can see who they're emailing and what they're typing. Or maybe someone's mother might work for a government agency, and you can do all these background checks on all these renters, and you can target individuals in the Washington, D.C. area. And by owning these 12 homes, you can carry out a multitude of purposes. They could be safe houses for other criminals in your network, in your spy ring in Congress. They could be, places where you're storing off-site servers. But it would be the perfect dragnet for gathering information on people and going through a database of renters whose relatives, whose business associates, whose affiliates, maybe even whose people are living in the home, could be targeted for your hacking. You could hack their cell phones. Another thing that we would learn from WikiLeaks, if you guys take a look, and it's a lot of material to pour through, you might want to maybe look at reporting on WikiLeaks, but there are a variety of tools. WikiLeaks did a release of information called the Vault 7 tools. And these are CIA-developed tools that are used for spying and hacking, software that can be installed on your cell phone, maybe without you knowing it. Certainly if the person has access to your home and your computers and your cell phone and the keys to your house, they could have a lot of opportunity to hack your equipment. And once they have that information, or even if they send you an email and trick your friends into responding to the email, they have these phishing emails where someone might send you an email that says, hey, something's wrong with your email account, enter your password right here, and you enter the password and then hit OK, and now suddenly someone else has your password. And they can compromise all of your accounts with your email password, your Google password, your Facebook password, whatever it might be. So these are very crafty individuals that have a wide range of plans for how they can infiltrate the community, how they can infiltrate Congress, how they can infiltrate the most sensitive committees, the Senate, the House Intelligence Committee, the Homeland, all of these committees, they didn't just go in there and do this haphazardly. This was a very carefully considered plan. So again, what I really want to try to do is I want to try to get to some of these other renters, because I think rather than really focusing on what might be identity theft or confusion that could be introduced through a lot of different means, I want to try to focus on finding more renters. If anyone has friends or family in the Virginia area or in the Washington, D.C. area, any of our veterans here have any sons or daughters that are working for the government, any relatives that are, that might have any information about this at all, I would encourage you to go to Crowdsource the Truth, and you can watch this video again. You can forward this video if you're using Facebook, if you're using Twitter, you can share it around. And how many people in the audience here are using Facebook? And how many use Twitter? And how many people are connected to more than, say, 100 people on each of those accounts? Okay. And so if each of you send this video to 100 people, and they send it to 100 people, and it's like that commercial, what was it, for Revlon back in the 70s or the 80s? They told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends. That's how this information can spread around. And in many ways, we can be more effective intelligence gathering network than the most powerful intelligence network in the world. We can be the most powerful information gathering network in the world. And if we can find these other renters who rented the homes that were owned by Imran Awan, and if you get really interested, you can go online. The spearhead of this investigation was an individual named George Webb. He's on YouTube, he's on Twitter. And if you go on there, you can see the names, the addresses of the homes that were owned by Imran Awan, that were rented. And we can try and drill down and figure out who was renting these homes. And we can talk to them, and we can hopefully find out who these other renters are and get a better picture of what was the MO. Who did these renters know? Who did they work for? Who did their wives and husbands and sons and daughters and brother-in-laws and sister-in-laws, and where was their previous employer? And maybe we can start to get a picture for exactly what Mr. Awan had in mind with renting out all these homes. Because the bank fraud, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The bank fraud is like the keyhole to the door that opens up to this spy ring in Congress. So that's pretty much what I want to share with you guys tonight. I wonder, does anyone have any questions they wanted to ask? Yes?
If the renters are paying rent, can you access the bank where the money is being deposited?
It's an interesting question. And for people who might not have heard on the internet, the question was, can we access the bank where the rent payments were deposited? Well, in many cases, or at least in the case of Laurel Everly, we found that she was pressured to pay in cash. Isn't that coincidental? In the case of, so Laurel Everly was pressured to pay in cash, and in fact, even met an associate of Imran Awan to receive her deposit back in cash in a dark garage. Very sketchy situation. In the case of Andre Taggart, he was pressured to pay by wire transfer to an account in Pakistan. So there was quite a good deal of impropriety going on in terms of how the payments were made, but that's an excellent question. Maybe we could, and again, if we find other renters and if we increase the scope of what we're looking at here, I think we might be able to do that, and that would be a very effective direction for the investigation to move in. Does anybody else have a question? Yes.
Question, but did any of these people vote? Couldn't you take a look at some of the books?
The question was, did any of the people vote? Which people, you mean?
The renters. Are we to assume that none of these people tried to vote?
That's an excellent idea. So you're saying if the people renting the homes were registered to vote, those homes might be registered to, those addresses might be associated with their voter registration.
Right.
Okay, that's a great idea. I don't know that anyone's looked at that. But just the fact that you've said that now,
Right.
and we've put that over the internet, 459 people just heard you say that. People are now going to go Google and try and look up registrations, voter registrations.
I worked the elections. I don't know how you would find out who is But anybody working at the poll in that district, you know, will have the book in front of them and,
Uh-huh.
you know,
Well,
there
that's-
will be addresses in there.
That's a very good point. So you're saying that people who are working the polls in the Virginia area there should be able to see who is associated with those homes. Well, okay, so hopefully people will do that. Now,
Because they'll have districts.
what if somebody just lived there for 9 months? How would that affect?
You know, I believe as soon as you can move, you know, as soon as you move, you are then able to vote in that particular place. I don't know Virginia's rules, but as soon as you move into a new home, you're able to vote there as soon as that's switched over and you've made that your.
But the renter would have to actively register that address to vote there, right?
Right.
Okay, so, all right, so maybe they did, maybe they didn't. We'd have to see. But that's, again, this is part of the crowdsource idea.
Right.
The fact that you work in a voting poll job, you're familiar with the process. This immediately came to mind for you. I would have never thought of that. I think a lot of people would have never thought of that. So hopefully people will look into it. Yes, sir.
Couldn't you get in your car, drive park your car across the street from one of these homes, and notice the license plate numbers of the cars which were frequenting that house, and then through maybe a contact in the local police department, they could certainly relate license plate numbers to names of people.
Well, so the question for people who might not have heard it is, couldn't someone go to the homes and look at the cars parked outside the homes and get the license plate numbers and give them to the police? I don't want to encourage people to put themselves into dangerous situations by going to other people's homes and that sort of thing. But, you know, definitely any of these types of things could happen. Now, most of these homes have been sold now, so doing it now wouldn't necessarily be effective. I think probably the best way we can function as a crowdsourced community is to look things up on the internet, do things like look at voting records, etc., things like Spokio and other websites that tell you who's been, you know, living in these, what names are associated with these addresses. Look up those names, look for social media accounts. One of the kind of problems that we've gotten into is this sort of swarming of people on these individuals who may be innocent. Obviously, someone who's rented this home, entirely likely that they have no idea that Imran Awan is allegedly a Pakistani ISI operative in the 111th Division of the Pakistani ISI. They just think they're renting a home from a guy named Alex who works for Congress. So that's the thing. We got to be real careful, and you know, we're not really professional investigators, and so that maybe is something that someone can do. I would recommend that you conduct that very carefully. Yes, in the back.
Why did the CIA facilitate the insertion of a ISI person
Into Congress. It's an excellent question. Why would the CIA facilitate the insertion of a Pakistani ISI member into Congress to spy on members of Congress? Well, the first reason is if they put a CIA operative in there and he got caught, then the CIA would be caught red-handed and they'd be in a lot of trouble. By using the ISI, they're doing what's called a liaison operation. Like when we heard that President Trump tweeted that Obama had his wires tapped, that was immediately poo-pooed as ridiculous. Now, it was a generalization. I don't think Barack Obama himself went to Trump Tower and tapped some copper wires and was listening in on Donald Trump's phone calls. I think what Donald Trump meant by that was his electronic communications were under surveillance by some mechanism at the behest of Barack Obama's administration. And what was likely done there's information that seems to indicate that GCHQ or some British intelligence operation or operative conducted that illegal wiretap, because those agencies do not fall under the same scrutiny or the same laws as the CIA. and the President of the United States doesn't have the ability to fire someone in the GCHQ and all these sort of things. So the first reason why the CIA would insert a Pakistani ISI member into Congress to spy is because it gives them plausible deniability if they get caught. And we know from Iran-Contra and other places where we've heard that term plausible deniability, the CIA loves that. That's the first reason. The second reason is you really have to ask yourself, well, what is the purpose of the CIA? What is the primary function of the CIA? Is it to protect us as citizens of the United States? Or is it to protect the interests of the largest corporations in the United States? Corporations like Boeing, corporations like Lockheed Martin, corporations like even Coca-Cola or Google or Amazon.com. How many people in the audience are aware that Amazon.com has a $600 million contract for cloud data services with the CIA? By a show of hands, how many people knew that? Yeah, the CIA pays Amazon.com $600 million, and Amazon.com has a computer cloud, a giant farm of computer servers and hard drives that stores the most sensitive information about the United States and our intelligence agencies. Okay? So, the other thing that's very interesting to note is that it's under Barack Obama in the last years of his presidency, Japan, and of course, people here will be well aware that Japan was not allowed to, certain restrictions put on the Japanese military after World War II. They were not allowed to initiate a first strike, etc. Some of these have been very recently lifted. I just had a meeting with someone today that was telling me about this. A gentleman by the name of Jan Weinberg, and I encourage everyone to look him up and look into what he's doing. He was a major figure in the elimination of the TPP and all of the citizen activism against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But he's informed me that that restriction on the Japanese military has been lifted, and Japan has already begun to exert some of their traditional military tactics of wanting to initiate first strikes. Now, this makes China and both North and South Korea very uncomfortable. There is a lot of historic tension between those countries. So we've been hearing a lot about THAAD missiles, the Terminal High Altitude Aerial Defense System that's been deployed in South Korea and Japan, ostensibly as a deterrent against North Korean missile attacks. But if you're China or someone that doesn't want U.S. missile systems in the Pacific region in this so-called pivot to Asia, that might make you very uncomfortable. Now, if you are Lockheed Martin, you love the idea of selling missiles to Japan and Korea and all that. So another reason why the CIA might want to have a spy network in Congress is that if there's someone in Congress who wants to vote against selling hundreds of millions or maybe even billions of dollars worth of missiles to Japan, to Korea, well, you might want to hack that member of Congress's cell phone and have someone tell him that, hey, maybe you might want to vote for these missiles because I don't think your wife wants to know about your girlfriend, or whatever they might be emailing about in the cell phone. So there's a myriad reason. There are many, many reasons why someone might want to have a spy ring in Congress. Yes, sir, in the back.
President, if your hypothesis is right that the CIA might have been injected into the spying on us, were they most likely spying on Republicans trying to go? And how possible is the contamination of our leadership on the Republican side that they can't investigate this nonsense?
I'm sorry, sir, I had a difficult time hearing you.
I said, if the CIA was hypothetically spying on American officials,
Yes.
with Mr. Montana and his team,
Yes.
just how likely is the Republican leadership in Congress basically conflicted or basically contaminated by the they can't do any investigations at all, it seems.
Right. Well, so I believe the question was if the CIA utilized Imran Awan to spy on Congress, how able are the Republicans to do an investigation?
Are they being corrupted, or they basically...
It's important to note that this is a spy ring that crosses the aisle. This is not a right wing or a left wing thing.
The Republicans just don't seem to have the wherewithal or the will to leak
Well, this is a very good question. It seems like there's no ability to investigate this type of thing. And my hypothesis is, or the collective hypothesis of this crowdsourced investigation, is that Congress and the U.S. government have been so badly compromised, as you have just pointed out with your question, that there does seem to be virtually no ability to investigate this. It raises the question, why has Attorney General Jeff Sessions not investigated Hillary Clinton? As Donald Trump promised, he was going to lock her up. Why hasn't he done that? Why haven't they gone forward with the investigation of any of these crimes? It seems that James Comey let Hillary Clinton off before the investigation was even done, and that hasn't been investigated. So it's an excellent question, and we don't yet know the answer. Hopefully, Christopher Wray and Jeff Sessions will be able to conduct an investigation and put an end to this.
Just to piggyback off of what was said, isn't it very possible that this is the way Debbie Wasserman-Schultz will ensure that who she chooses for the next election gets in? Because then she has the information on her own party, which she is not above doing anymore, and using that information to get the candidate that she prefers.
Well, I think you're exactly right. It's not a matter of Democrats spying on Republicans or Republicans spying on Democrats. This is bad versus good. This is people that would do anything to win. People that don't care about the Constitution, people that don't care about your safety, don't care about your families. We don't know what they're doing with this information. You may recall that there was a Chinook helicopter crash that killed many members of SEAL Team 6 after the raid that allegedly killed Osama bin Laden. I didn't see the body. But after that raid, these members of SEAL Team 6 were killed. Now, how did that happen? Did someone have information on that mission that allowed them to compromise the security of that helicopter? If someone had access to congressional and military emails and cell phones and communications, it certainly seems like they might be able to access critical mission information that would compromise the safety of our soldiers. Yes?
No organization or anyone in the organization, Crowdsource the Truth, are they doing anything about looking into the murder of Seth Rich?
So you're asking about, are we doing anything about looking into the murder of Seth Rich? The answer is yes. Myself and my former partner, George Webb, we personally interviewed Rod Wheeler, who is the private detective and the veteran detective from the DC Metro Police who was hired for the family to conduct an investigation into the murder of Seth Rich. We've gathered quite a lot of evidence. George Webb has gone and walked through the neighborhood on the path that Seth Rich took. He has interviewed several employees at Lou's Bar, which is allegedly the last location where Seth Rich was seen. He's identified that the attending physician at MedStar, the hospital where Seth Rich was allegedly taken, was a doctor who goes by the name of Jack Sava. But curiously, Jack Sava's social security number matches the social security number of a gentleman known as Dr. Altelyevich. So there's a lot of strange things surrounding this murder of Seth Rich, and I've taken a lot of flack from people because I say I haven't seen evidence that Seth Rich has actually been murdered. Now, how many people are familiar with Dr. Jerome Corsi? Okay, great, quite a few. We also did an intelligence assessment with Dr. Corsi, the subject of which was Seth Rich. Was Seth Rich the source for WikiLeaks? And one of the things that Dr. Corsi pointed out was that Seth Rich, prior to working for the DNC, worked for a political operative firm called Greenberg, Quinlan, Rosner. Has anybody ever heard of that firm? No, right? Anybody here in New Jersey work for a political operative firm? No, there's not too many of them around. And I didn't know anybody who worked for a political operative firm, but this is basically, it's kind of like a PR firm, but it's like a dirty tricks firm. So it would seem that, cooking up kooky, crazy plans to cause the other guys to lose is what companies like Greenberg, Quinlan, and Rosner do. Now, when we interviewed Rod Wheeler, the detective, he said there's been no death certificate, no autopsy report, There was no police lookout. The three out of the 5 Metro police officers, DC Metro police officers who responded to the scene had video body cameras on them, but none of that photographic evidence has been seen. And according to Rod Wheeler, who was a homicide detective for 5 years, he said this never happens. In an off-the-record interview with a former Metro Police Police Academy trainer, he also said that never happens. So it's strange to me that would take place. There is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist by the name of Cy Hirsch, who many people might have heard of. He wrote about the My Lai massacre for the New York Times back in the 70s. So a couple weeks ago, an audio recording, quite obviously secretly recorded. It wasn't like a radio interview. It was someone had a cell phone recording in their pocket in a restaurant or a bar, and Cy Hirsch could be heard speaking about the Seth Rich murder and alleged information that he had about an FBI report, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But yet Cy Hirsch has not come forward and said, oh yes, that was me, and I stand by everything I've said there. In fact, it would seem that Cy Hirsch does not stand by what was said in that audio recording because he hasn't come forward. And furthermore, the audio was released, it would seem, by a guy named Ed Butowski. Now, Ed Butowski is a slightly mysterious figure to me because I don't know what he has to do with Seth Rich or the Seth Rich family or why he would be so interested, but apparently this is the guy who paid Rod Wheeler to do the investigation. And he also released a secret recording of Rod Wheeler talking about Seth Rich. And when I listened to it, I'm a digital media professional. I've been working with this stuff for a long, long time. I noticed a difference in the audio quality in this Rod Wheeler conversation, almost as if it had been cut and edited and spliced together. And I asked Rod Wheeler about it, and he confirmed that, in fact, it was. So it was a manipulated recording. So we're starting to get an understanding for the way that this guy, Ed Butowski, operates, and I think we have good reason to believe that even though Cy Hirsch has a great deal of credibility, this audio recording that was presented as a statement from Cy Hirsch has virtually no credibility. So it's curious to me that almost anything having to do with this alleged murder of Seth Rich has so much mystery and strangeness surrounding it. Yes, sir.
Didn't the police officer you were talking about, didn't the police officer you were talking about, didn't he recant what he said? I seem to remember that.
Right. The question was, didn't Rod Wheeler retract his statements? And the answer is no, he didn't. What Rod Wheeler had initially said was he had heard from an FBI source that he had gotten information from an FBI source and that information came from a Fox News affiliate who had this FBI source. He didn't recant it. He clarified the statement. Rod Wheeler has always stuck by his original statement, which is no death certificate, no ballistic evidence, no autopsy report, and he was told to drop the case. He basically was told to not continue investigating. Now, of course, we're very sensitive. We're talking about someone's family member that was killed. We need to be sensitive to that. But just to speculate for a moment, if someone were to, let's say, kidnap a member of someone's family and tell them, hey, your son, daughter, brother, whatever, is involved in this government, whatever, and we don't want him testifying. We don't want him getting involved, so we want everybody to think he's dead. And don't worry, he's fine. He's going to be living in Indonesia for the next 5 years, 10 years, all depends. But you need to convince everyone that he's dead because this case needs to go away, and we will kill him if you don't do that. Now that's influence over a family. That would get honest people to do something that they would normally not ever do. And that's another thing that keeps coming back in this ongoing investigation is how influence is exerted. You might be sitting there thinking, Jason sounds like a crazy conspiracy theorist. How could everyone in Congress possibly be going along with this plan? And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is there are ways that you can exert influence on people, honest people, to get them to do things that they ordinarily would not do. And the case of Seth Rich is a possible example of that. We don't know. We don't know. If they say it was a street robbery, well, okay, there's this whole story about an FBI car that got broken into, and two random street thugs steal a gun out of a law enforcement car, that doesn't seem like something street thugs would do. Looks like a cop car, they're going to run away from it. And I think if you're a street thug and you steal a gun, that seems like a good take. You might as well go sell that gun to some other criminal for a couple $100 and call it a night. You're going to rob somebody with the gun, and how much cash is a 27-year-old guy carrying around? Not to mention the wallet wasn't taken, the cell phone wasn't taken, the watch wasn't taken. It was a pretty crappy robbery. So there's all kinds of questions. Yes?
Do you, well, this is another subject, but do you think John Brennan had anything to do with Michael Hastings' murder?
Michael Hastings, the reporter whose car crashed into the tree?
He was doing an investigation on John Brennan.
Right. You're right. So the question is about Michael Hastings, and did John Brennan have anything to do with his murder? I don't know. I haven't investigated that directly, but we do know, partially from WikiLeaks releases, that intelligence agents and intelligence operatives do have the ability to take control over certain systems in a car. And I'm sure, if you have a relatively new car, or you've seen any of these relatively new cars, they have all kinds, cruise control was sort of the first semi-automatic system to come in there. And even the automatic transmission before that. Now we've got devices in cars that keep you in the lane. We've even got some cars that partially drive themselves, and it would seem we're within a year or two of a fully automated car that will just drive itself. So even though it might sound crazy at first, the notion that someone could remotely operate your car or install equipment in your car that could take it over through the computer, that could remotely operate it. And I mean, listen, remote operation might only be lock the accelerator pedal in full open, and that's controlled by a computer. Cars, have had for many, many years a system called drive-by-wire, where instead of the gas pedal actually operating a gas pump, it's just an electronic control that sends a signal to a computer in the car that controls the flow of gas to the engine. So certainly that's something that could be taken over relatively easily and get the car going 100 miles an hour and go out of control and crash. Yes, sir.
What hard evidence do you have on this Awan case as far as the spy ring and anything pertinent to that? Do we have anything at all, or is it just intrigue at this point? Or
Well, the Washington Post has categorized it as intrigue, but of course it does seem strange to me that someone who does not live in a home would have a Cox internet router operating in that home, plugged into the wall with AC power, plugged into the cable connection with a cable line coming in, and with an RJ45 category 5 or 6 cable plugged into the wall, quite clearly feeding a computer network somewhere in that home. We couple that with the fact that the renter has told us that this individual was accessing the home 2 to 3 times a week. Now, I don't know if anyone here has ever rented a home to anybody, but to me that sounds like excessive access for the owner to a rental home. Doesn't seem like that would be necessary throughout the course of 9 months. Yes?
Plus, I heard that he would go to the house frequently, just talking or fixing the sink or
That's true.
that type of thing.
But even that seems suspicious to me because, sir, I presume you work a full-time job?
Yes.
Okay. How many hours of the day does that occupy for you? 8, 10 hours a day?
Yeah.
Do you have time to go around caulking things and fixing, right? So if you were working full-time in Congress and owning 12 homes,
Right.
maybe you're a very industrious guy, maybe you've got a wealthy family or maybe you figured out a great way to cheat the Congressional Federal Credit Union, get all these loans and buy all these houses. Wouldn't you hire a handyman to go do that stuff? How would you have time to go to each of these 12 homes? Now, we've only sampled 2, as I've said. So in my mind, the most important direction for this investigation to go in is to find more renters and to start to flesh out this guy's pattern of activity. Was he 2 days a week at this home, another 2 days a week at another home? When did this guy ever go to Congress and do his IT work other than hacking these phones? The DC Capitol Police are the ones that banned him from Capitol Hill, not this investigation. So they seem to have some evidence. Laurel Everly, the renter in the home, has told us in her own words in an interview that you guys can all watch on Crowdsource the Truth on YouTube, that her laptop went missing for 2 or 3 days and she had no idea where it was, and then it appeared on her bed. Now, she's got 2 daughters and 2 sons, and maybe one of them borrowed it, but we're not really clear on that. So it's certainly, I mean, again, I don't have a picture of Imran Awan, you know, stealing a cell phone out of John McCain's pocket. I don't have a confession from him, but we do have a lot of strong evidence that would indicate really inappropriate activity.
Have you heard where the investigation is going to go as far as the Congress is concerned? I mean, are they going to really delve into this, or do we know? Or?
Well, the question is, where is the investigation going as far as Congress is concerned, or the FBI, I presume you would mean, and the U.S. Capitol Police? Well, just last week, I did accompany Laurel Everly while she delivered her property to the U.S. Capitol Police as evidence. There was some strange things that went on in terms of how that evidence was recorded. And of course, I don't control the Capitol Police. I don't control how individuals handle their property or what decisions they make. I personally was just there to assist her in driving her there and accompanying her there. But it's my hope that they're continuing to investigate. I hope that they would have maybe created a computer image of that hard drive, copied the entire contents of that hard drive so they can do a digital forensic examination of what's contained on there. Laurel has reported to me that the computer was hacked and failed subsequent to this mysterious 2-day disappearance. She also told me that her friends, co-workers, family members got a very bizarre email from her that they all wrote back and said, "Hey, was this email from you?" And she said, "Oh no, I got hacked. That's not from me." Her cell phone stopped working. Again, we spoke about the Marine veteran, Andre Taggart. He found these Blackberrys that had government markings on them. He found printer servers, wireless routers, all this IT equipment in his house. So that was very strange. There really is quite a large amount of evidence, and I'm really just touching on it right now. So there is a great deal of evidence. Yes, in the back.
Was any of this related to, I remember seeing something about fiber that was running out to the Navy Yard, underground fiber that was running out to the Navy Yard to some block.
Uh-huh.
That was recruited by this Pakistani. Is that related to this Awan guy?
You know, it may in fact be, as I said, you know, a lot of this investigation has been conducted by a guy named George Webb, and he knows far more about the details pertaining to individual pieces of evidence like the fiber running to the Navy Yard and stuff like that. And I would encourage you to go onto YouTube and review his videos to find out more about that. You know, my investigation, my aspect of this investigation has sort of taken another direction, and you know, they're both happening concurrently, but we're investigating sort of different things. I've been more focused on the witnesses and interviewing witnesses and gathering photographic evidence and things like that. And the fiber and all those other things I don't know quite as much about, but I do agree I have heard something about fiber and the Navy Yard, and those things are related, yes.
Thank you.
Yes.
Jason, could you tell the folks about, you went to Congress.
Oh, yes.
The clear and present danger portfolio about the spy ring.
Right, right.
Can you tell us a little bit about that? I think that'd be-
Absolutely, absolutely. As I said, we have a number of different people who have joined our crowdsource community, and some of them include individuals with intelligence backgrounds, with military backgrounds, and investigative backgrounds, law enforcement backgrounds. One of these individuals goes by a code name, Mr. Hudson. And we use these code names to protect the identities of people. And Mr. Hudson has a great deal of experience. He's become a mentor to me, and he provides invaluable advice. One of the things that he recommended that I do was to put together a report about all of this evidence and to take it to Congress and present it to them and let them know that there's a clear and present danger to the Congress, spying happening there. And so I went to Washington, D.C. I printed out a bunch of these reports that include a lot of the information that I'm sharing with you guys today. And I handed it out to various members of Congress. I even met on the steps there. I met Michael McCall, who is a representative from Texas, who is on the House Committee on Homeland Security. And I handed him the report and a brief conversation with him out there in the street. And he was very polite. Stood there, looked at the report, told me that he had heard about it peripherally, but that he was going to look into it some more. And now I've been trying to get back in touch with Representative McCall so that we can talk about it a bit more and see if there is going to be some action. And again, I think we're trying to turn a very big ship. So I'm hopeful that in the coming days and weeks, Mr. McCall's office will get back to me and we can try and work that out. You know, I mentioned this individual, Jan Weinberg, who I was speaking with earlier today, and he has told me stories about his trips to Congress, bringing this information. It is a huge, huge hurdle to get over, to get a response from congressional representatives. If you are not Boeing or Lockheed Martin or some, city group or some gigantic billionaire style thing with lobbyists and all that. But again, I'm hopeful that what we're doing is kind of a new model. 334 or 335 days ago, this journalist who I've mentioned, George Webb, he started this investigation. And he started it after reading an article in True Pundit. Does anybody here read True Pundit, the website? I would encourage you guys to check out the True Pundit. It's a really great source of information. That's another sort of new media, what I would call like a new media Fifth Estate type journalism outlet. And that's made up of individuals with intelligence background, law enforcement background, tremendous sources. And they've been of great assistance to us as well. But they had an article about a guy named Eric Braverman, who was the CEO of the Clinton Foundation, who went to the FBI and blew the whistle on corruption in the Clinton Foundation, specifically related to their dissemination of AIDS drugs in Africa. This is something that the Clinton Foundation was never authorized to do. And if you watch Crowdsource the Truth on Sundays, you can see our recurring show, Sunday with Charles, where Charles Ortel, who is an internationally renowned financial analyst and investigator who has been revealing felony after felony after felony as executed by the various arms of the Clinton Foundation and their associates. Now, you say, oh, well, they're disseminating AIDS drugs in Africa. What could possibly be wrong with that? I mean, the problem is they were never authorized to do it. And the drugs that they were disseminating, it would seem, were not up to standards, and they were not helping the people. And what they were doing is lining the pockets of their friends who own the pharmaceutical companies. And, when you start to really examine these things, you're creating tax shelters and tax benefits for these wealthy billionaires. And it really, when you start to peel back the layers of the onion, it's a rotten onion under there. Yes, sir.
Is there any truth to the alleged connection between Trump and the Russians?
Any truth to the
Any
alleged
truth to that?
any truth to the alleged connection between President Donald Trump and the Russians? Well, I did see him at a press conference with Vladimir Putin since he's become president, so I think he's associating with Russians in that regard. I have not seen what I would consider tangible evidence of any collusion between Donald Trump and Russians. I saw a dossier that was assembled that said that Russian prostitutes urinated on a bed, but I haven't seen any testimony from any Russian women. I haven't seen any DNA samples from a sheet from a hotel. I haven't seen anything that I'm sorry if that's offensive to anyone, but this is a fact that someone put that document out. I've seen evidence that the FBI paid $100,000 to get that document made, and that John McCain was complicit in this activity. I've seen evidence that they've been pushing that narrative based on falsehoods. There's a journalist by the name of Kurt Eichenwald, who actually, when I first started Crowdsource the Truth back in October, when I first realized the power of this approach, I had created a video about the petrodollar and how I felt that this was a very damaging system that linked the value of our currency to the need throughout the world for oil, and that it was a system enforced under the threat of death by the incredibly powerful military of the United States. And I put out this video about the petrodollar created by Henry Kissinger under Richard Nixon, when Richard Nixon went off the gold standard in 1971 or 1973. I'm sure a lot of you remember that. And people started responding to this video. Oh, Jason, you're an idiot. This is a thinly veiled pro-Trump video and blah, blah, blah. And they presented me with information about this guy, Kurt Eichenwald. And Eichenwald was talking about how Donald Trump was reading Russian propaganda, that he got from SputnikNews.com, and that's the only place he could have gotten it because it was only published for 20 minutes and then they took it down. And it was a total lie. The document had been published for 3 days on WikiLeaks. And Kurt Eichenwald said that it was manipulated by the Russians. Totally untrue. It was a cryptographically verified email that was verbatim, word for word quote from an article written by Kurt Eichenwald, quoted by Sidney Blumenthal, one of the principals at Osprey Global, very treacherous lawyer who works for Hillary Clinton and works with John Podesta. And he sent it saying, hey, this is the truth. He titled the email The Truth. So if I sent you that email and I said, this is a total lie, that would be me saying this is wrong. But if I send it to you and say, this is the truth, I might as well have said those words. Donald Trump read that document. Kurt Eichenwald said it was manipulated by the Russians. Kurt Eichenwald was lying. Blatantly, provably lying. And he did it again and again and again in 3 broadcasts that I documented on Crowdsource the Truth. So I would say, in my opinion, as I have observed, there is no connection. And the Russian collusion, the Russia hacked the election, that's nonsense. If anything, we have strong evidence that agents of the Pakistani ISI, quite possibly put in place by the CIA and complicit members of the U.S. Congress, they might have hacked the election. Well, anyway, I want to thank everybody for coming to listen to me speak tonight. I really appreciate you giving me the time. Thanks again to our veterans. I really appreciate your service, and I hope everyone has a fantastic night.